Have you ever had family night TV? Well, you say there's no such thing as family night TV because we never could agree on what we all would want to watch together. How do you battle for the control, the remote? Or are there choices that maybe somebody, everybody in the group can decide on? One of those I've come to understand is on the Discovery Channel, and it's called Dirty Jobs. You're going to see a picture of the man who oversees that, which has now no longer been renewed. How many of you knew that? Yeah, I see you dirty job favorites out there. Surprising hit was host Mike Rowe taking on what is really a disgustingly, you never thought of doing kind of dirty job every week. He had cleaned dairy farm floors. He has plucked stinging bloodworms out of the low tide muck. He has scrubbed out penguin enclosures at a zoo. He has slogged through muddy swamps in search of gators. Yep, he's been there and done the dirty jobs. Kids love it because they somehow love to get dirty. The grosser, the dirtier it seems, the better. The parents like to watch it because we like to remind our youngsters, first of all, you threaten them that unless they get a good education and do their homework, this is what they'll end up doing for all of their life. Or maybe you tell them that there's always somebody who does something worse. It never fails when you have a child or you have a grandchild and you teach them about the etiquette of cleanliness. We have a 2-year-old you know about, and he loves puddles. Well, we were out doing our little scooter rides in the driveway, and I did my thing. Here Dr. Dan is going to teach him the psychology of staying clean. And so we discussed the fact that he had on new shoes, brand new shoes from Christmas. And that he just looked wonderful, and that he could go everywhere in the driveway except this one spot where the water kind of settled. And so I got it through to him. He said yes. He nodded his head. Yes, nodded his head. We went about doing what we normally do, and sure enough, 2 minutes later, I looked behind me, and he's walking right through, standing in it, going like this, looking at me. The kids love to get dirty. Psalm 40, David encounters his own kind of a dirt. I have spent my week with this passage. I don't know that I've ever dug in as deeply to this passage, but he talks about the dirt in this desolate pit and this miry bog. You've got the scripture listed in your worship folder. Look at it. I waited and waited and waited for God. Now that's not bad. Now this is, by the way, this is the Message version. Though I waited and waited and waited for God. And at last he looked, and finally he listened. Isn't that nice that God would listen? He lifted me out of the ditch, the desolate pit in some of your translations. He pulled me from the deep mud, or the miry bog in some of your translations. He stood me up on a solid rock to make sure I wouldn't slip. He taught me how to sing the latest God song, a praise song to our God. More and more people are seeing this. They enter the mystery, abandoning themselves to God. Now, we've all been there, haven't we? We've all been cast in a dirty place, in a place that we did not like, a miry pit, a kind of place that we would not want to spend a lot of time there. The moment we're ready to turn our resignation in, suffocating under the stress of a job and it's only Monday. The moment we realize that everything our mom has said is right. The moment your 2-year-old's vocabulary is limited to one word, and that word is no. The moment the SUV is making some odd sputtering sounds, and yet you know the bank account has very little in it. The moment we begin to pretend to be happy for someone, and it's all pretend. We all have those moments. But the best news, as I've read this passage over and over again, is no matter how deep you feel in the pit, no matter how desolate you feel in the pit, there is a workaround. And perhaps it's time to play in the mud, so to speak. It's an idea that I've been rolling around in my head most of the week. Now, the word play is a word that I want to use loosely. If you define the word play, it says to engage in an activity for enjoyment and recreation. I would want to play with the word recreation and say, today when we think about playing in the dirt, let's do it recreationally or recreationally. In other words, we would like, when our lives are in the mire, when our lives are deep in the dirt or the desolate pit or whatever place we find ourselves, that we in fact learn that it is not the worst place in the world for God to be able to use in order to recreate a part of us. So bring your life to bear on this, a kind of playing in the mud, if you would. Bonnie Grant, she certainly knows about that. You would agree with us. In a recent article, she said, we need to start playing in the mud more. She sort of says it. She bases her article on a research about the natural antidepressant in soil called Mycobacterium vacui. Now, that's a big name for some neurons that very much perform like Prozac, if you can. In other words, there are these tiny bugs, bacteria, and germs in soil that make you feel as though you were on Prozac. Now, I know many of you are going to rush out of here today and go put your hands in the soil. Doesn't work quite like that. But it is interesting to see the science behind this. It says the bacterium is found in soil and may stimulate serotonin production, which makes you relaxed and happier. And they go further. They explain lack of this serotonin has been linked to depression and anxiety, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and bipolar problems. He said, but the bacterium appears to be a natural antidepressant in soil and has no adverse health effects. These antidepressant microbes in soil may be easy to use as just playing in the dirt. Now, I would tell you, how many of you have grown up with kids who ate dirt? Every one of you. How many of you had to say to them, do not eat dirt? And of course, they spit it out, and then you turned around and they picked up another wad. Because you and I believe that it's awful, and in most cases it probably is, but I find it interesting that what we find here. Now, I don't know what everybody in this room is thinking, but I do know what my wife is thinking, and she is going to use this against me come spring this year. She is going to say to me, remember that thing you said about playing in the soil? And she's going to say, I'm getting ready to play, you come on. I will try to resist. But let's talk about being mired in the mud, if you would. Mucking about in the mud is fun for one thing, and that is we enjoy the getting mired part of it less. You know, playing around in dirt and kind of being a part of life. And I would use the analogy that everybody in this room and who will be listening by way of television, everybody plays in the dirt. You get out there, you live in the real world, stuff happens, things are not the best, and so we get dirty, if you would. But the difference that the psalmist wants to make very clear to us is it's one thing to get dirty, and it's another to get mired in the dirt, mired in the mud of life. David has found himself, if we believe that he's writer of this psalm, he's found himself in the ditch and in a deep mud, and he's definitely not feeling the serotonin, is he? We don't know exactly what's happened to David here. Over in Psalm 51, we believe that the Bathsheba incident has happened and that he has gone through significant and awful depression in his life, and he's suffering from that. But we don't know exactly all that he's going in here, but we do know this. Something is going on, and David, like all of us, can get bogged down. So we're going to spend most of our time today talking about getting out of the muck, if you would. So how do you get out of it? Well, first of all, the easiest way, and the way that you and I most rely on, is that we blame somebody else for the problem. I'm amazed. It's the easiest go-to experience of anybody who gets stuck. They somehow find someone or some set of circumstances or something to blame other than themselves. Easiest way to do that is simply to look around. Attributing blame frees us from the responsibility of owning it and, of course, doing something about it. I found a quote about what is called the blame game, and you'll see it up there. Stop the blame game, stop looking out the window and look in the mirror. The fact is, it is awfully hard to look into the mirror sometimes because we don't want to see what the mirror holds for us. And so it's easy to look around and look around us and behind us and in front of us, but we don't like seeing ourselves. People amaze. We just don't want to work hard enough. They don't want to create some kind of positive attitude about it. Barbara Brown Taylor tells a great story of Barbara Brown Taylor is a phenomenal preacher, and she's written a number of books, and she made a decision a number of years ago to leave the formal pastorate as an Episcopal minister and to go and live on a farm and just write books. She's done so outside of Atlanta. And she had a friend who was coming to visit her and was looking forward to that. And this has been a few years ago. And even though they had cell phones, this particular lady was behind the times and she didn't have a cell phone with her. And so, sure enough, she lived out far enough in the country that this friend that was coming to visit her had gotten lost. And so she had an out-of-date map in her hand, and she was almost an hour late by now, and she was speeding through this little town in Georgia called Mount Airy when she saw the blue lights in the rearview mirror. She knew that she had been busted. She pulls over, and she immediately talked to the officer when he walked up to the car. "I am so sorry. I know I was speeding, but I've been lost for the last 40 minutes, and I cannot find Tower Terrace anywhere on my map." And the police officer very wisely said to her, "Well, I'm sorry about that too, ma'am, but what made you think that hurrying would help you find your way?" And that's the truth, isn't it? What one thing do you and I do when we want to make things better? Well, typically, we just speed up. If we want to get caught up, if we want to get more things accomplished, the thing almost always is not to do less as much as to do more faster. And so we live in a world that oftentimes just kind of pushes for speed. She blamed her speeding on her being lost. So how do we get out of the muck? Well, we blame somebody else, or secondly, the possibility to step outside. Gail Boss has written an article called Natural Medicine, and she says in there, of course, we try to make a sense of things, and that's human nature, but logic doesn't help much in shoring up our hearts. And she's right, isn't she? Our go-to is to get things done by increasing our speed or by getting more logical. And I love both of those. I'll just tell you, I'm a time management guy, and I'm also a guy that likes logic. I mean, I can 2 + 2 = 4, therefore it should be okay to do that. But I also know that both of those things will not resolve the peace in my heart that I need. To restore our hearts, poet Mary Oliver says, step out of the shore or to the mountainside or to the road or to the riverbank or to the desert and pay attention. And she's right. She is right. There are moments when you and I simply have to step outside. You say, well, I can't go to the beach. Well, you know what? Go to the internet and find a big picture of the beach and put it on your screen. Go to a mountain, go to find your screen. It is amazing to me, and if you think we don't have great sunsets, then go out to the airport sometime. I mean, I'm amazed how we talk about the sunsets in Florida, but we have a great one right here in northern Kentucky if you just want to look for it. But step aside. Most of life is spent so much on the track that we never step aside. We are doing a series right now in the Sunday school class. We calling it Simplify, Unclutter Your Soul. It's by Bill Hybels, and we started it this morning. You're welcome to join us. It's a 4-week series on just uncluttering your soul. He says something, and we quoted it and looked at it this morning in the class that I think is so true. He said, simplified living. Anybody here not for that? Simplified living is about more than doing less. It's being who God called us to be with a wholeheartedness and a single-minded focus. Now take those two words, wholeheartedness and single-minded focus. He says it's walking away from innumerable lesser opportunities in favor of a few to which we've been called and to which we have been created. And finally, he says it's a lifestyle that allows us, when our heads hit the pillow at night, to reflect with gratitude that our day was well invested and that the varied responsibilities of our lives are in order. What is it that you do every week that puts your life in order? What is it that you do every week that allows you to focus and to remember that which really matters the most in your life? And I will tell you the things that I do in my life, and I will mention this one first, is this room. There's something about being in this room with you to worship together, sing voices together, hear scripture together, hear God speaking to us together, that is unlike any other thing that I do each week. Read my Bible, prayer, those are the things that I can do anywhere, but they're nonetheless things that happen uniquely here in this place. And there's one final one, and it's one that Hybels talks a lot about. He says there is this thing called chair time. He said, how much chair time have you had recently? Now, not chair time to watch the TV. I suspect most of us have gotten that one taken care of. But he calls it chair time to be alone with God, sitting down in the chair, journaling about God, talking with God, reading scripture, and just spending. And he challenges a mere 15 minutes a day, he says, can in fact change our lives. And I believe he's right. So how do we get out of the muck? We blame somebody else, or the possibility of stepping outside. But the third option is getting really closer to the truth, and that is the third option is to shift our position. If you've ever been a person who travels, who does a lot of hiking and been in forest, and going following a trail, you'll know what I'm talking about here. It's a young man by the name of David Douglas who does a lot of that. Lives out in the southwestern United States. And he was on his way one day and noticed that he was looking for the entrance to a little canyon area that his trail led to. And he said he walked right by it, and he knew he had passed it, but he didn't know how to find it. So when he turned around, he came back and he says there was this slight break in the rock crevice that he saw from the other angle that he could not see from this angle, that caused him to see where it is what he needed to go. And I thought, how many times do we just simply look at things one way and try to fit everything into what we're seeing on that one set of glasses that we wear all the time? And if we could just position ourselves a little differently, if we could just get before God and ask him to filter our eyes and our hearts and our brains, something might be different. Only by shifting your position, we can have some new possibilities. How about it is to attack a problem from a different view, or to let go of some limiting assumptions. Maybe it's not their fault. Maybe I did have some responsibility. By embracing certain realities that we've resisted, maybe by acknowledging that we were wrong and somebody else was right, maybe by taking an active role in recovery rather than waiting for somebody else to save us from our own situation. The longer I live, and I quote it about once or twice a year to myself, I keep it close to my desk, is Chuck Swindoll's view about attitude. I read it again. I've been doing some premarital counseling with a couple that I'm going to be marrying here in the spring, and we were walking through one of those video instructions that I use, and we began talking about the power of attitude, and I looked that quote back up again. The longer I live, he says, the more I realize the impact of attitude it has on life. Attitude to me is more important than all the facts. It's more important than the past, than education, than money, than circumstances, than failures, successes. More important than what other people think, say, or do. It is more important than appearance or giftedness or skill. It will make or break a company, a church, or a home. Remarkable thing is that we have a choice every day regarding the attitude that we will embrace for the day. We cannot change our past. We cannot change the fact that people will act in a certain way. We cannot change the inevitable. The only thing we can do is play on the one string we have, and that is our attitude. I'm convinced that life is 10% what happens to me and 90% how I react to it. And so it is with you. We are in charge of our attitudes. Every day I have to make choices with people. I help make choices with them. They ask me how they found themselves into this situation, and I ask if I get permission to speak into their life, if they really want to hear, and then I share with them as honestly and as lovingly as I can about that situation. But there are some that have come to me over and over again, and I want to say to them, did you not hear what we talked about the last time? Because you see, they're still looking with one view. And the one view I see regularly in couples is the one is looking to the other one for their happiness. And if the other one does not provide their happiness for them, then they don't know what to do. Well, I will tell you, as much as I'm crazy in love with one diva, she will never be the sole purpose, design of my happiness. That God and I made a peace with long before I met her, and God made his peace with her, so that we're not coming along expecting to find our peace in each other, but knowing that there is God that ultimately provides us the peace that we need, the position that we need, the view that we need, the attitude that we need in order to be a good wife, good husband to each other. There's a parable of an old farmer who owned a mule. It's a parable, so remember that. Mule fell into the farmer's well, and the farmer heard the mule braying and went to the site and began assessing the situation. The farmer sympathized with the old mule, but decided that neither the mule nor the well was worth the trouble of saving, and so instead he called his neighbors and he asked them to bring their shovels and to bury the old mule and put him out of his misery. For you animal lovers, remember it's a parable. The mule seemed hysterical, as you might expect, and so when the dirt struck his back, he shook it off. The old farmer began to notice something, that every time they put that shovel of dirt on his back, he kept shaking it off, and sure enough, they kept pouring it in until finally he kept getting on top of the dirt every time he shook it off his back. And guess who got out of that old well on his own? Next time I see you and call you a mule, that's what you'll remember, I'm sure. Because there is a part of all of us in that, isn't there? It's shaking off the dirt, getting on top of that thing, and seeing if we can really get out of the hole that we're in. There is an alternative to every impossible situation. So how do we get out of the muck? We can blame somebody. We can step outside. We can shift our position and look at things differently. But maybe best of all, for those of us, I think, who are somewhat mature in our faith, we have learned to sing praises, to express gratitude. I will tell you, after talking with you for 10 to 20 minutes, most of us can tell if the other person starts with a point of gratitude. It's something you can't hide. If you are living a grateful life, if your life stirs from a deep sense of gratitude for God, you will not hide it. It comes out of us, doesn't it? So for you today, I would encourage you. The scripture that we read a moment ago, he taught me how to what? To sing the latest song. In other words, it's a new song. It's a late song. It's a new song that God's taught me because he's taken the circumstances that I am in and he has taught me in that set of circumstances to sing the latest song, and it is a song, a praise song to God. Why? What does gratitude do? Gratitude reminds us that we are not alone. Gratitude says that circumstances, even though they have not changed, my heart has changed. Even though we're still standing in the muck, we will not allow it to overcome us because we've learned this one key word, and it's the word trust. And so let's trust God. It's the final kind of punchline, if you would. Let's trust God when we don't feel like trusting. When's the last time you just woke up and said, oh, I just feel like trusting God today? I don't know that it ever naturally happens. I think we learn it. It is learned behavior. As we accept the Spirit of God in our lives, we learn to trust. When that tire goes flat, when that heart goes, it gets sick, you get sick at your heart, sick at your stomach because a certain set of circumstances happen, somebody's hurt your feeling. When those kinds of things happen, whether it be something physical or something spiritual, if we're not careful, we can push the trusting to the side and lose our bearings. In moments like these, we need to learn what it means to trust. Thomas Long proposes a question not unlike what Frederick Buechner asked a long time ago. And Thomas is a Presbyterian pastor now, teacher really. He's been teaching in his latter days. But he said, what if, one of those what if questions, he says, what if God were to rearrange the stars in the sky one night and spell out the words, I really exist? He said he wondered what would happen. And his thought was this: churches would spill out over into football stadiums, crime would cease, wars would suddenly stop, and an uncanny hush would fall over the world, at least for a while. You remember 9/11 days. And then there would be a message in the stars night after night, month after month, year after year. And every night the sky would proclaim, I really exist. And it would become a normal part of nature. And after thinking about how nice that would at least seem on the surface, he says, what really needs to happen, however, is this. What we really need and want in the deepest need of our heart is not proof that there is a God somewhere who exists, or even scientific evidence that a resurrection has happened some time ago in history, but rather what we need is God who is right here, knee-deep in the mud and the mire of human existence. A risen Christ who comes to us every day to give life and hope. And that is a God who comes not in evidence, but who comes in relationship of trust that we call faith. I really believe he's right, isn't he? So finally, there is playing in the dirt, and there is being buried in it. And that's what I hope you have understood about our time together today. There is something powerful about playing in life, about digging in and experiencing life, and sometimes getting dirty, not the bad kind of dirty, but just getting in there. But there is something incredibly bad about it, getting stuck. And so choose playing is what I'm encouraging you to do. Minister friend had a duty to be it was a small rural hospital, not unlike the one in Clark County that I used to visit in regularly. But they had to rotate some of the ministers to be the chaplain for the week. And so, sure enough, he was the chaplain for the week of this particular little rural hospital. And he had heard about there'd been a new birth, and so he went over and was going to greet the family about this baby that was born. So he made his way in, and sure enough, he inquired as to the baby's gender and the baby's name, and he found out it was a little girl, and the little girl's name was Elizabeth. He located the young father leaning against a wall, and he congratulated him on having this new beautiful baby. And so there they stood together looking in, could see through the glass this little Elizabeth, and she was squirming and the red-faced, and she was squealing. And so she was so red-faced that the pastor guy, the chaplain, was worried that the young father might be concerned that there was something wrong with his child. And so he explained to the young man, he says, now Elizabeth isn't sick. It's good for babies to scream and to do all that. And it clears out their lungs and it gets their voices going. And he had the most interesting conversation with this young father. Young father, not knowing that he was a reverend, said, oh, I know she's not sick, but she's mad as hell. He introduced himself about that time, which we ministers have done on occasion. And he apologized. Oh, pardon me, Reverend. Craig said, well, that's all right. Why is she so mad? He was intrigued now to know. The father said, well, wouldn't you be mad? One minute you're with God in heaven, and the next minute you're in Georgia. He looks at him and he said, you believe that she was with God before she came here? He said, oh, yeah. Do you think she'll remember, he says. And the man says this, well, that's up to her mother and her father. That's up to me. And it's up to the church. You see, we've got to see that she remembers. Because if she forgets, she's a goner. Now, I don't know if children are with God right before they leave, but it's a good thought. Because think about it. They come into this world, and they're just so precious and so trusting. long before they become those monsters when they're 2 years old. You know. But they come and the main category, the main characteristic of a child is what? Trust. So it doesn't stretch my imagination much to believe that a child comes into this world trusting, that our best moment with God is when we shift back into that mode of being childlike and trust God. I like the story for a couple of reasons. It reminds us of our responsibility as a church, not just moms and dads, but the church, to help every child remember that trusting is the best thing they do every day.